All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samuel?
Well, we teased this last time. We're going to talk about stupid women in academia because of my experiences in school, and we've just been looking at some stuff lately, anyways. And it's going to sound like ranting and raving from two boys, right? But at the same time, there are some points that need to be made
Hmm.
because, well, yeah, we'll just get into it.
Yeah. Well, it should be a fun episode because I'm icing my neck trying to fight off a headache. You're hoping you're not having a mini stroke, and it's been a fun week for me. So, boy, howdy, I should have made my coffee Irish. The mood I'm in right now. I forgot what we were talking about today, and then I saw your T-shirt as we were getting set up, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we're talking about
Yeah.
chicks." That's right.
I am a snatch specialist.
Yeah, and uh whole no, that's the Wheel of Time wiki, which is for later. Uh so I have, just as a to set up on a laugh, have I've gotten back on X recently just to comment here and there, but mostly to look for places where I can throw out a link to one of our videos, just see if I can get a little more engagement. Um, And have you seen the Project 2025 memes and the comments of that started going around when the media was hyper focused on this and trying to link it to Trump, and there were Project 2025 will, and then something ridiculous as a response to all this media nonsense, and they made me chuckle. But I don't even know who this person is, but this is the first one I've seen in a while that made me laugh out loud. And since we're talking about chicks, um, I actually had this for Wheel of Time discussion, but Project 2025 will assign every pop star a sunburned hillbilly to teach her how to love, and it's responding to uh someone named Lana Del Rey, who I remember seeing this a while back, and people freaking out over this pop star who's apparently was dating some Louisiana alligator tour guide, and now they've gotten married, and so kudos to them. And I laughed out loud, but then I remembered our rants last year when the right was being dumb about the Kelsey Swift stuff. And yeah, I was annoyed that they're shoving it in my face when I'm trying to watch football. But on the other hand, I'm rooting for the kids. And you look at Swift's dating history, and now you have an actual masculine man. And no, it may be that, yeah, she finally has a real man. And oh, this is what a relationship is supposed to be like,
Well,
So
it's
I'm
funny,
rooting for you.
but just a comment on that specific situation, but not get stuck on it is the she just endorsed Biden and everybody's all mad at her now and everything. I'm like, well, it was actually your upset ranting about her and Kelsey that kind of pushed her in that direction. It was all these conservatives that were like, "Oh, it's throwing her in my face," and "Oh, she's so stupid," and "Oh, she chooses the wrong people," and and it was like, just like let it lie,
Hmm.
let them be a celebrity couple. The Swifties are going to be watch football. Some football fans are going to listen to Swift, and oh my gosh, everybody's happy. But no, all your ranting and raving and madness, which I actually think might be some of it might have been a setup, but it's it pushed her that direction.
Hmm.
I mean, and you look at the other side, Kennedy wouldn't be on Trump's team if the Dems didn't push him out.
Hmm.
Both sides could learn from this dynamic, you
Yeah.
know. But back to women. So part of the thing is, as we've been talking about, I'm in school and I have to navigate this thing and social psychology, which is probably the most female-driven division of psychology, which is a female-driven profession at this point, or is at least in academia. We talked about the precocious manhood, which actually is the paper wasn't as bad as the class discussion. I read the paper and I was like, okay, they're a little off on some things, but they're basically just identifying the phenomenon that men have higher anxiety right now because masculinity is kind of under threat. Now they might have been a little incorrect on the sources of that, or what the social roles play into that, because I think there's more of a biological nature to it. And the fact that that biological nature has no outlet right now, or very few outlets other than sports and the military, realistically.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, so the paper wasn't too bad, but then the class discussion started. And of course, all the 18 out of the 21 people in the class that are female kind of took it in the, well, men are just feeling threatened and men are da 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 da. And I'm like, you just don't know. You just don't get it. First of all, let's start with the name, precocious manhood.
Actually,
Precocious.
let me stop right there because you just said something that, you know, uh, who was it? I think it was Weinstein when he was on Modern Wisdom, like last year, whenever it was, when he talked about Epstein, and I used some of those clips when we were talking about it. And but one of the other things he said in that discussion when they started to get to the a lot of the woke stuff is, especially the Rainbow Mafia stuff, is he made this great point that on the surface and what they espouse is marginalized people. And because these people have been marginalized, we need to recognize that. And so we need an expansion of empathy. But actually, what they're doing is a restriction of empathy.
Hmm.
Of if you are in certain groups, you don't get any. In fact, which one of the is it anti-racist where he flat out says the cure to past
Yes. Yes.
discrimination is current discrimination?
Yep.
and 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 that, he's saying the quiet part out loud and it's no longer quiet. So but even if it were what you said, feeling threatened, pause right there, honey. You need women only spaces because men make you feel threatened. That is a thing. And it's true that, yeah, we can be. In fact, it's why I had the Wheel of Time thing, not to get ahead of ourselves, but that's actually a comment in one of the chapters we're going to read next time on Wheel of Time, is Logain thinking about how he used his physical presence as an edge because he was weakened because he didn't have his magical power, right?
Hmm.
That is a thing. And it is something guys do naturally. Jordan Peterson got in a lot of trouble for talking about that. So guys should understand women need their space in the same way that men need their space, in the same way that, hey, I'm feeling threatened, so you need to back up. Okay, well, you're feeling threatened, so you're a pathetic loser and it's a conspiracy theorist and your feelings aren't real. No, honey, you can't have it both ways.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so what did the paper get correct? And this is what I was talking about, is it's even when you've done something, so the concept of precocious manhood, even when you've done something to prove your manliness, you have to keep doing it. You
Mm,
have to keep renewing it, and it's always under threat. It's always under threat. And that's actually a true thing, not from
yeah.
women, but it is actually, I mean, we want the attention of women. That's why we're manly, but it's other men that threaten it.
Well,
And
you bring up Sapolsky started with baboons, right?
mhm,
And so primates are an area of study that is kind of a baseline for these kinds of trains of thought in psychology, is how do primates do it? Now, how do we relate that to the peak evolution of primates? How do we relate that to humans? And there's a really good new documentary on Netflix about orangutans. And one of the focuses of that is this ebb and flow of who's going to be the dominant male in a territory. And it is, okay, I'm the dominant male now. But then that big male has to keep looking around, has to keep making those vocalizations that they do that says, hey, stay out of my territory. This is my spot. Right.
mhm,
Um, and in fact, something I learned that I didn't know is when a dominant male is dominant, it will actually suppress the hormones of other males. So that, an orangutan that gets that male that gets that big face, that only happens when there is a weakness of the dominant male and there will be a boost of hormones. So over the span of like 10 months to a year, a male can double in size and get those big flanges. And that relates to humans. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not that extreme necessarily. It's not that obvious, but this is why we study those things, because it lets us say, oh, hey, that gives me an insight into how how humans relate in certain similar ways.
Hmm. Well, the constant renewal, the constant need to kind of prove this psychologically to yourself, that's actually not a bad thing, right? That keeps us doing the right thing. I mean, everything worthwhile in life is like that. You eat dinner, you're
Mm-hmm.
only satisfied for a little while because you have to eat dinner again. So you do the manly thing that helps you survive and helps your family and helps you reproduce and all of those side effects of it. You have to keep doing, or else you're going to basically lose everything you had worked for.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you would lose your life if you just stopped eating or stopped drinking water or stopped going to bed on time. All of these things. So the best things in life are that way. And that's a good thing because that keeps you doing the right thing. You're never supposed to be eternally happy. You're never supposed to be satisfied all the time.
We use fitness analogies a lot because that's our wheelhouse, yours primarily, especially. And something I try to tell people is our bodies work best. Our bodies are made or evolved for activity, for motion, whether you're sitting or standing. I've had to train people who mostly sitting these days, but I think I've mentioned before, one of my clients at the box gym was a pharmacist. And not only was he a pharmacist, but he owned his own small pharmacy. So he's a small business owner too, which meant he was working 12-hour days, and he was standing hunched over a counter versus sitting staring at a computer screen. Either way, it was bad. Either way, hey, come on. And I'm my own worst client because I need to do this myself. And I always nag people, hey, every once in a while, you got to move. Every once in a while, you need to change that position, because whether you're standing all the time or sitting all the time, when your body becomes static, it gets out of balance because it is made for movement. We are active beings, both physically and intellectually.
Hmm. And you have to keep renewing it. Again, that's the whole point. Everything good in life you have to keep working at. That's the nature of existence. And that goes physically and mentally. So, yes, masculinity. It's hard work. And I don't think women understand that. They want to feminize men. The anxiety isn't because we're threatened by women that they can work in our spaces and all this stuff. It's that you're forcing them to be something they're not from a very young age. The
Mm-hmm.
entire school system is a forced feminization of men, of children. And that's going to lead to anxiety because you're going to grow up and you're going to have all of these underlying things in your psyche that have no outlet and you have no idea how to use. And so it gets pent up. You have no idea of a constructive way to use it and you act out. And then people say, toxic masculinity. Because, yeah, it didn't come out right because you weren't allowed to naturally progress into it. Now, the men we look up to were our top athletes, our
Mm-hmm.
military professional, all of these people that comedians. I mean, aggression takes many forms. And it's an aggressive act to get out in front of a lot of people and put yourself out there
Mm-hmm.
to their judgment of your comedy, right? So that's why comedy is a male driven uh, industry because it takes that mentality. It takes that little bit of aggression to get out there and do the thing. Uh, so it takes many forms. Aggression, business owners, entrepreneurs. That's an aggressive act to start a business. That's a risk taking. And what we've done from a young age is tell kids, sit down, shut up, don't take any risks. We've overparented them, we've overmothered them,
Don't
and
climb that tree. Climb.
that's what these girls don't get.
Don't climb that tree. Climb this plastic wall with a safety harness on instead.
Hmm. Here's your helmet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And here's your helmet.
Yep. Oh, two kids wrestling around. Stop fighting, right? No, they're just wrestling around. You know,
Hmm.
if someone breaks a nose, then someone gets in trouble. But other than that, let them go, you know?
Hmm. Well, so I wish I could remember where the origin of this train of thought was, but had this thought the other day, and well, I think it was because when I was pulling up these numbers that I was going to talk about the gender differences in voting, and looking at the trend line of that, and it just kind of suddenly occurred to me, the the right especially has focused on, um especially the Trumpian right, the emasculation of men, and you brought up the feminization of boys in school, of oh, you're too hyperactive, let's pump you up with Ritalin. No, he's not too hyperactive, he's a boy and you don't let him play. And it has gotten worse over the year now, where a lot of places don't even have recess anymore. And if you do, again, it's a more structured activity rather than just get out on the playground and go run around and play after lunch, right? So, but it just kind of occurred to me, actually, no. And one of the kernels that probably sparked this is watching a lot of podcasts now. You've got a lot of women who are out there now talking about how actually the sexual revolution was terrible for women. Trigonometry, modern wisdom, Peterson, they have all talked to a number of authors and academics in this space, women who are saying the sexual revolution for women said women should treat sex like men and they will be happier. Well, I think there's a flip side to that too, which is actually no. Before we started feminizing, it's not just about the soy boys. The sexual revolution was emasculating for men, because masculinity is an applied science. Okay. Masculinity, what makes it masculinity rather than toxic masculinity, is you are doing something and you are doing something productive. And the ultimate outlet for that, just like the ultimate outlet of femininity is motherhood, is fatherhood, is not just creating, helping to create life, being one half of the creation of this new life, but also one half of the raising of that life, of the caring for a wife and child, or if you want to get all bent out of shape, partner and child, whatever. The point being, this is the this is what you are growing up to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why boys and girls grow up differently. And if you've ever had children, especially if you have had a son and a daughter, right away, the differences are pretty apparent. Once they get past this, just where they sit there and drool stage, what literally, once they become toddlers, once they start moving around, they are different. And now the differences are going to be different through the individuals. I shouldn't have to add that caveat, but the fact is, they are different. Did I derail you, or is this the direction you were going?
Uh, there's so many different directions. Uh, the other major point I wanted to bring up, and we can just talk about the details after that, then is the uh the things that men do that this is the problem. It's not that we're threatened by women in the workplace. It's that this movement and the sexual revolution is part of it. The integration is part of it. But the social psychologist, the problem with them is they think they can socially engineer everything. So when women got into the workplace, it wasn't that men were threatened by them. Some men were,
Mm-hmm.
weaker men were, but it's that when you go into a masculine environment, which a competitive workplace is a kind of a masculine environment because competition is typically a masculine trait, they didn't like that. They called it misogyny and tried to change the system.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to change it into something that was different, and men didn't want the different system. There's a difference between feeling threatened by someone and understanding that the system changing makes it different for you as well. And that's not always a good thing for the
Mm-hmm.
industry itself. But also, we're not stupid. Men are not stupid. We see the incongruency of that equality. You want equal representation in the workplace, but every workplace representation you want involves air conditioning and walls, right? You're not out there on the line. You're not a lines person. You're not in the sewer with a hard hat on doing the hard work. I
Pouring
brought
tar on a hot road in a 108-degree Texas.
this up in class. I didn't get to go into as detail as I'm going to go here, but I did bring it up that airstrike operations when I was working with those guys and I was the second lead uh, trainer for them. They didn't always show up
Hmm.
because they're not going to show up anywhere anymore.
Hmm.
And by the way, they were all men. There wasn't a single female in there because there probably are some out there, but there are very few women that could do that job because it involves paratrooping into the mountains of Afghanistan and hiking for days through mountains to mark something with a laser so a jet can come through and bomb it. And then hiking back to your pickup point because you're in enemy territory. They can't just come get you.
Hmm.
So it is a super dangerous job, and the women aren't lining up for those. They're lining up to be lawyers and doctors and say not sales because sales is too competitive. That's you see actually very few women in sales, even though they do better in it because you're more likely to buy something
Yeah.
from a female than a
Well,
male.
not to get off on a rant here, but maybe this is one of the problems with the medical industry is for the longest time, the place to be if you were a cute girl was as a pharmacy sales rep. Like that was a thing for like 5 years. Like every pharmacy sales rep you saw coming to your doctor's office was a good looking, younger woman.
Hmm.
Ha.
Yeah. Well, you see it in oil and gas too. Yeah,
Mm.
they're really heavily utilized in the sales. Uh, but also even in medicine, a highly competitive, stress-inducing profession like orthopedics is very low represented by females. And it's not because they're dumber. It's not because they can't do STEM. It's because it takes that kind of mentality. It takes a very masculine,
Yeah.
challenge-driven mentality to be able to do that job very well. But psychology, on the other hand, it takes listening to people. And, it's very low stress in and of itself. So it's
Not
you,
just listening to someone, but a doctor patient relationship is generally very different because it is a hierarchical relationship, whereas a counselor is more of a co-equal because there's a give and take. There's a let's explore this. Why do you think that is it possible that? Why don't you try this? So essentially, this kind of occurred to me because of a thought I sent you last night. Was that essentially what you are creating is a coalition of two or three giggity in a couples counseling setting. You're creating a coalition, and this popped into my head because I was watching this Korean cooking competition on Netflix with my wife, and it was hilarious. The first team competition was a male led team and a female led team. And right away, because you've talked about this before, I said, I was the Leo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood of ooh, ooh, pointing at the TV. I know this one. I know this one. It is because the man immediately created a hierarchy. The other men in the team deferred to them, and the women on the team deferred to him as well. And he directed. He had a plan. He had a structure. The other team was much more chaotic because that you could see, oh, she keeps trying to get a consensus.
Mhm.
She's a let everybody have their input. And then what does everybody think the best choice would be? The best option would be? We need to pick a sauce. Do we want this sauce or that sauce? Well, everybody taste. Will everybody give their opinion? And you're on a timer. So, the guys on that team, especially, are going crazy, looking at the clock, going, we got to make a decision. Someone make a decision.
Which is funny, you use the word consensus. And let's stick with medicine. The As far as integration goes, medical bureaucracy is extremely female driven in the last 40 years. And you notice we've made the shift to consensus medicine instead of individual doctoring. What is the medical consensus? What is the standard of care? All of these
Standard of
things.
care. That is
And
why I'm in such pain right now, actually, is standard of care.
yeah, so yeah, it's not always a good thing. And I mean, I just want to be like, can we next week have the discussion on when femininity can go too far?
Hmm.
Because you, Miss Lefty Professor, the week before talked about overparenting and stuff like that. It's like that's actually when femininity goes too far. That's
And
the definition of
yeah,
overparenting.
and isn't it interesting what overparenting, it looks different between the mother and the father.
Hmm.
The overbearing mother, is smothering. The overbearing father is a tyrant
Hmm.
because we're different.
Yeah, and I hate using the examples of when it goes too far to talk about the norm.
Hmm.
And when we shifted the norm into a whole industry, you're going to get a psychopathic version of that when it goes too far. And so we actually need to be more integrated, but integrated in a way where it doesn't shift too far one way or the other. Some industries do better in highly competitive environments. Sales, I brought that up before. The military, you're kind of competing for your life there. So that's kind of important. But some things can take that softer, more protective hand. And we need to figure out where those things are. About nursing, we bring up the Scandinavian studies, nursing.
Hmm.
Now, the last thing that I just wanted, this is the thing I wanted to smack every one of them in the head and say, hey, the fact that you don't appreciate masculinity at all tells me you have nothing but first world problems because you don't see that person dying for you. You don't
Yeah.
see that person doing the hard work for you. You are in a bubble.
That's kind of where this idea of, oh, actually, no, emasculation of men started both for the feminizing and the soy boy. It's no, it started with the sexual revolution because, as you've pointed out, the reason women have such first world problems and and men don't act like men anymore is because we have outsourced so many of these things that we used to do to government or um oh shoot, I just brain farted on her name again. Of she was talking with Peterson months back about misogyny and toxic masculinity, and she made the point of, well, actually, no, this 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 idea, this tension between the sexes over gender roles, that genesis wasn't until the Industrial Revolution because we started outsourcing.
Mary Harrington.
Harrington, there you go. So even before we started outsourcing to the government, we started outsourcing to consumer products, things that, and one of the examples she uses is that, and like my wife and sisters are aberrations because they know how to sew. Well, every woman used to know how to sew because they had to. In the same way that every man used to know how to hunt because he had to,
Hmm.
because that's how you get clothes. That's how you get food. Well, now you don't because now we've outsourced this to this manufacturer and they make the textiles.
Yeah, and
Even before the sewing is making the fabric yourself.
and I think I texted you this, and this is one reason I have trouble in this social psychology class because social psychology should be these are the things that culture does that influence you. And then you can meld that with the cognitives, with the psychs and everything. I hate the infighting in psychology, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
because they're all pieces to a big puzzle. And these are the things that can affect you from culture. Okay, so now how does that work with how we're engineered from an psych standpoint, right? And but the social psychologists think everything is a social construct. Everything is you can socially engineer. So here's how it affects you. So here's how you can use that.
Mm-hmm.
But just like we see what we talked about with the young men going through the school system, there's an underlying thing that's bred into you. And I texted you this. Imagine the hubris, and this works for religious people or atheists because it's the same. The hubris that thinking you can engineer something that will overcome hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution or creation. They both work there
Mm-hmm.
because the hubris that you can construct something that will overcome that. You show me how you are affected by these things, and I'll show you the evolutionary root of that. Okay, so here's the one with the parenting that came up. People who have children and are made aware of how much money they invest into their children will report higher happiness levels when they spend time with their children than people who are presented information that downplays that cost. That's a bias. That's an investment bias. It can go wrong, like we see with cults, but it's actually a good thing that we evolved that way because having children is costly. Having children is anti my survival because it takes effort, it takes resources. And oh, yeah, I will die for that child. We evolved to feel that way, to feel happier with our children because we've invested in them. And the more you invest, the happier you are with your children. That's a good thing. But the social psychs are like, oh, well, because this phenomenon exists, that means you're just being controlled by pressure from society to have children. And I'm like, yeah, complete opposite. Complete opposite.
Yeah.
Your body is designed to feel that way.
These people make me curious. The social psychs that you're talking about make me curious. I wonder how they would react if you could somehow get them in a different kind of setting on a different topic and then ask them, are you a nature or a nurture person? Because I wonder individually, would they acknowledge the genetic component there? Because we've railed about that from the very beginning of our recordings, and when we talk about psych, it's not an either or. It's a yes and.
Mm-hmm.
It now we can debate how much of each, but it's nonsense on an individual level to say there is no genetic component because we kind of cracked the genome. They gave some people a Nobel Prize for that, and we know that it exists and we're starting to learn what it does and how it works. So it would be nonsense on an individual level to say it's all one or the other. So then why on a societal level do you say, no, it is all nurture. It is all society. That makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and that's it's kind of the theme of everything that we're talking about is everything, and this has been my philosophy, everything is good until it's not. Social psych is good in a way of understanding how culture, your peer groups, socialization, we're a social being. We interact with each other, how those things affect you. And yeah, that can help you guard from some bad things and help you contribute in some good ways. We also did a great paper on virtuosity and how virtuosity actually improves your mood, but it takes future forecasting to be able to know that because usually you have to make a sacrifice in the process, right? But you can understand that to be a better person, but you can also understand how marketing works or how sales work or how propaganda works to protect yourself from it because we do have triggers that allow those things to work. So now you can identify it and our prefrontal cortex can take over and say, "Oh, don't do that thing. Don't listen to that thing." So it's a very good field if you take it as it is. But I think realistically the problem is the people who are in charge of it want to use it to engineer the world they want. And that's the scary part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've
Which,
seen it work in scale. Propaganda was the fuel behind why a country full of mostly good people did bad things in the 1930s and 40s, right?
or well, we've railed against the flawed science of nutrition and how much of that has come from prop and didn't the guy who literally invented propaganda, wasn't he like the nephew of Freud? What was his name? I thought he was a relation of Freud. And he is
No,
um
no, because Freud was uh, in the middle of his career when the Nazis were coming to. In fact, I did find letters from Freud to Einstein, and back and forth. They were pen
mhm.
pals.
Bernays is
Talk,
who I was trying to think of.
yeah.
Um See, I thought I may be thinking of something else, but I was trying to think of Bernays. Um
Now they
who's
might have been using some of Freud's work, but
yeah, who's referred to as the pioneer in the field of public relations. Um, and he uh he was basically the idea. Oh, well, he was an American, but he was born in Vienna. Um, his uncle was Sigmund Freud. Okay, so I was right.
okay.
Okay, so one of the things he did, one of his uh contributions is, and this was on an episode of the Y Files a while back, is they because they were talking about mind control. And I loved the point they were trying to make, because they kind of start with the out there stuff, like can the CIA control your brain with microwaves? It's like, well, no, I mean they could fry your brain with microwaves, but um, look, you don't have to get out there with sci-fi weirdness. Yeah, your mind can be controlled in the same way that a hypnotist can get you to do something wacky, but he can't get you to jump off a cliff unless you're feeling suicidal. And then, yeah, actually, he could, right?
Or they make you think that your child is threatened by the cliff. Been
Mm-hmm.
there, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, anyway, they brought up that one of the things he did is that before the early 1900s, most Americans didn't eat breakfast, or they would just have something really light, like a bit of toast and some coffee. Bernays came up with the marketing campaign of bacon and eggs. And he came up with the idea of, well, you just need some experts to say that this is a good hearty breakfast and this is what you need to start your day with, and people will listen. And they did. And that's where the whole concept of bacon and eggs as a good breakfast came from. And there, I mean, yeah, we've talked about you've talked about the witchcraft biochemistry of, well, actually, yeah, some a hit of protein in the morning can be good for you for these
Hmm.
reasons. And so it's not that the experts weren't wrong, it was the tell everybody they need to do this
Hmm. Well,
and they
you
will
see
listen.
the flip side of it. The Kellogg industry, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and they took us away from the bacon and eggs
Yep.
with another propaganda campaign.
But it was the same idea, because I don't remember if it was the egg producers or the pork producers that we need to sell more, and this is where the idea came from, is it was a marketing idea. And then the Kellogg's people came along and said, hey, we should do that, but with cornflakes instead of bacon and eggs. And they did. They used the same technique, and they mind controlled you.
Hmm. And we've seen it in spades in the last 4 years,
Mhm.
ever since the COVID thing. Trust the experts, trust the experts, trust the experts. They, the propaganda machine. The great example is the graphs we brought up with how much racism is used in media now,
Mhm. Mhm.
and all of those things. Just using those words more amped up the signal to 11 when it comes to that kind of thing. So
Yep. All right. And so how does this apply on kind of the probably the biggest macro example we have, which is the presidential election and gender differences in voting and these things? That small scale that we have been doing for decades, that has mind controlled us, it now affects how we vote. And um, so one of the manifestations of this is repeal the 19th Amendment. And the first person I ever heard say that was Ann Coulter, because she was being snarky. But she was being snarky to make the point that women voters are ruining America from the conservative point of view. Um, Annoyingly, I'm starting to see people say it now, and I'm not sure if they're joking, but the point was supposed.
I've heard in independent spaces some joking about it and some serious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and much like with kind of Haidt and Peterson, you know, opening my mind to the idea that, okay, you may think you're right, but you need the other side. You need people who think differently. There is a difference. There is a yin and a yang to how people think, as well as how genders think and act. Just like you need the opposite sex, giggity. You need, if you're on the right, you need people who are on the left and think differently from you. Well, we are a we are better people when we are paired with a member of the opposite sex who is complementary to us. We are a better country when we are paired with and we listen to and we let that feminine influence direct us to a worthwhile goal and getting there in a good way, which is what, on the individual level they do. That's what a good woman does to a good man, and he's good if he listens to that influence. Well, again, the problem is, as you've said, we have outsourced all of these things that used to be necessary for literal life. We have outsourced these things either to industry or the government, or more scarily these days, both working together. So as we have outsourced these things, as we have stopped doing these things, we have stopped thinking about these things as well as being influenced by them. And so we are we have slowly, and as we've gone downhill towards this cliff, anyone who's ridden a bike down a hill, which I don't even know if you're allowed to do that anymore, but a boy learning to ride a bicycle, riding recklessly down a hill because it's exhilarating. But then the more you go, the faster you go.
Mm-hmm.
You start to pick up speed. And so more recently, that acceleration just keeps pumping up because as we have outsourced our masculinity and our femininity to industry or government, we have then started to outsource our citizenship to experts, to bureaucrats, and to politicians. And we just show up, most of us just 4 years, sometimes every 2 years if you vote in the off year elections, and even less if you vote in the local elections, which annoyingly tend to pop up at random times. We have outsourced all that of if you are even a citizen, your citizenship is just voting for someone and then going back and to your, you know, Pornhub and Xbox. And
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know what direction you're going with this, but to kind of tie it to our last bit there, the biggest uh difference in what am I trying discrepancy in voting blocks is when you look at Republicans between with working men, it's like 55 to 45%. It's pretty close. You look at it, Republicans to Democrats with mothers, it's about 57% to 43%. It is pretty close. You look at unmarried women with no children, it's like 80-20. And I'm pretty sure you can guess which direction that goes. And here's my thing. I hear the argument about abortion that women say old crusty men shouldn't be making decisions of what I can do with my body. My thing is, okay, deal. But unmarried women with no children should not have any say of whether we go to war or not, because you got no skin in that game.
heck, let's not even get that extreme. Why are you having a say in and making laws for family court?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the reasons family courts became so biased against fathers was from the influence of unmarried and often childless feminists. You know, writing about, talking about, advocating for how bad men are. And well, there's the result. And was it a good result? No. No. But again, back to where we started of the men feel threatened. They feel like their masculinity is threatened. Is well, hold on a second. You talk about your feelings all the time and how we have to respect that and how you need your women only spaces and all that, unless the man identifies as a woman, but we'll save that for another day. It, you can't have it both ways. Well, same thing here. Can't have it both ways. Well, so this could be an interesting election because Trump is so polarizing in general, but has been especially so with that female vote. And Like the right tab here. Yeah. So uh Steve Day shared some numbers earlier this week on his show, and let me pull them up here so anyone who's watching can look along as I go over these about the gender gap in elections and the way that has changed and how that has impacted elections. And he starts in 1980 because that's really where the data begins for a lot of this stuff. We just people weren't tracking this stuff, so for most demographic data, you go back to 1980. Uh, Men +2 overall electorate. So that was, and the other reason he starts there is um, there is some demographic data going back farther, and I'll show that in a second. And that was the last time men were actually the majority of voters. And that matters. That's what I was talking about the repeal the 19th people. That's why I brought that up is, you wouldn't have to repeal the 19th if you would just get off your ass and go vote.
Mm-hmm.
But because we have outsourced so many things that men traditionally did to industry and government, women are much more interested and concerned with those government policies, therefore, because it literally affects them more. Because for most guys, they figure, I just go out and do my thing. So they don't care as much unless it directly interferes with them and their life. So, anyway, the numbers man +2 overall electorate. Reagan won men by 17, and he won women by 1. In 1984, after his policies had had time to take effect and people saw the results, and they said, oh, I like this. Women were +6 overall electorate, but Reagan won men by 24 and won women by 16. 88, women +4 overall. Bush won men by 16, won women by 2, and he won that election. 92, women +6 overall. Clinton won men by 3, won women by 7.
That one needs an asterisk because Perot was
But
such a
put an
huge,
asterisk there
yeah,
because of Perot.
yeah.
2000 or 96, women +4. Dole won men by 1. Clinton won women by 17. 2000, women +4. Bush won men by 11. Gore won women by 10. And you see that margin, and remember that election came down to a few hundred votes in Florida.
Mm-hmm. The hanging
2000
chads.
and hanging chads. Women +8 overall. Bush won men by 12. Kerry won women by 3. And what was going on in 2004? The height of the Iraq War and the beginnings of the surge
Mm-hmm.
there. So it was a very masculine, if you will, time, and that was a major component of it. Of the election was the Iraq War. That was what Kerry's focus was, and he won men by a lot, and men were more of an electorate than they had been. So Bush won narrowly. 2008, women +6 overall. Obama won men by 1 and women by 13. 2012, women +6. Romney won men by 7. Obama won women by 11. 2016, women +4 overall. Trump won men by 11. Clinton won women by 13. And where did Trump win? He lost the popular vote, but he won because he won the Rust Belt, which is a more run the Rust Belt due to blue collar workers, a much more masculine demographic. Uh,
Yeah, and
2020 women.
that was an important distinction there because
Mhm,
masculinity and male are different.
mhm.
Now they correspond, they correlate, but there are masculine women as well, and
Yeah.
there are feminine men.
And then 2020 women +4. Uh, Trump won by 8. Men by 8. Biden won women by 15. And again, another very close margin. Um, but you can look back, and to me, the first number is more interesting and more important to me, and much more applicable to what we have been talking about today, but also what a lot of people have been talking about more and more. You know, really, I think you could thank Peterson for this a lot because he became such a lightning rod of, oh my gosh, how can you say that? Oh my gosh, how can you tell boys that they should be men and that being a man means being a man means being masculine? How dare you? And then a lot of people looked at that and said, well, actually, no, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? And that has kind of that created the modern kind of men's movement. Um,
Well,
and
unfortunately, there are other voices in that arena
yes,
too.
then but on the flip side to that, then you also get the Tates of the world who are
Mhm.
revolting. Um, but there is some data going back further for the overall turnout data, and so we're looking at a graph here for those of you listening along that goes back to the 1964 election and goes up to the 2020 election, and you see a blue line in the middle that is the national average, and then black line male, light gray line female, and you can see there is a big difference between turnout in men above in the 1964 election. Well, first of all, the most interesting thing to me is that well over half turned out in the first place. And so you see 72-ish% of men actually turned up to vote. 67-ish% of women turned up to vote. Okay. Those both of those lines, or all three of those lines, start to drop precipitously. And I don't think that's an accident that you have this cultural anti-culture revolution going on, counterculture revolution going on in the 60s, and people start checking out. And as people start to check out, men stay checked out. So these lines drop precipitously to 1976, which is the election where they kind of converge, and both sides drop under 60% turnout. And then women start to go up, men keep going down. And there's a bump in the 92 election. And I have to think that a lot of that was probably Desert Storm and kind of a boost in patriotism. And so you have a
Mhm.
boost in interest in that election because Gulf War and the wall coming down, that's all happening in the early
Well,
90s.
you talk about countercultures. I wonder how much Perot had to do with that bump too, because
Mm,
how many people that
true.
weren't planning on voting went out and voted for him
Hmm.
because there was a third option.
Yeah. Um, but you can see that even with that bump, then numbers crater. And in the 96 election, the turnout was below 55%. And the turnout for women was just above 55%. So not good turnout, but still men aren't there. And you can see the gap begins to widen even as turnout picks up a little bit, starting in 2000, the gap widens. And now you can see 2020, the lines are going up again. So at least people are paying attention and those lines are starting to converge. And to me, that's going to be the more interesting fact, if I can use that word loosely, considering the fortification that happened in 2020, and we have no idea what kind of shenanigans are going to happen this election, that that will be the more interesting number. And I think ultimately what decides it, especially since as the reason Dace brought up these numbers is as he looks at the data, and he's a data guy, he has worked on elections before as a data guy, that we may have the biggest gender gap ever in voting. So ultimately, what decides the election may be the turnout numbers of, all right, men, are you going to be men and are you going to show up? Because if that gender gap is ludicrously huge, then and women still way outpace men in total voters, Harris wins. But if that gender gap is huge, but the male gender gap is huge too, and men actually show up to vote, Trump wins.
Well, thinking long term, this is one reason why I really wish the people on the right would consider a national abortion compromise. Like I said, it should be an amendment that gives a range that allows the states to have some freedom, but makes sure it's not completely banned anywhere. Because how many of those women are voting on one issue? Pretty
The
much all
single
of them.
the single ones, a lot of them. The
Yeah.
overwhelming majority of pro-abortion voters are single women.
So think of every other issue that impacts our nation on a greater degree: the economy, immigration, uh, uh, foreign wars, all of these things. If we can make this national compromise, we take away that issue. I wonder what that gap in voting would be without that one issue. And it's a compromise. You're a zygote person, and then there's the other side, which is what, 18 weeks after birth, no questions asked if the
Yeah,
kid dies, so
that was something Trump brought up in the debate, and then oh, he got fact checked for, and then that was one of the
there's
responses
eight
on
states
X
with no
was,
limits. Yeah.
yeah, not only no limits, but people were doing side by sides of the fact check of Trump saying, "Oh, no one's saying you can kill a baby after birth," and then the Virginia governor, Democrat Virginia governor candidate, who was a doctor, saying in a radio interview, "Well, if the baby survives the procedure, we make it comfortable while we have a discussion with the mother about what she wants to do," which is a euphemistic way of saying we asked the mom if we can go ahead and just kill this baby that is outside the womb and has survived.
Yeah, but so if we come up with a constitutional amendment that says something like the states are allowed to decide within 12 to 24 weeks, that's a pretty good compromise, because that can play to most conservative states are around 12 anyways, and most uh reasonable liberals would be fine with 24, right? So okay, so you've got this wiggle room, states, you decide the rest. Now it's not an issue nationally. What's that going to change in the demographic? Because right now women are voting on abortion, but I'm a business owner. Look what it's going to do to my taxes. I've seen the tax plan, the
Yeah.
$4 trillion tax plan, and they lie. This is a lie because they know that we're not going to tax anybody more under $400,000. Yes, you are, because Medicaid tax is going to go up. Everybody pays that. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if you own a business or if you're an employee, if you make $5 a year or if you make $5 billion a year. Everybody pays Medicaid tax. That's going to go up 2%. Everybody's taxes just went up 2%. That's one out of the 30 something bullet points. Okay. Yes, everybody's taxes are going to go up no matter how much you make,
Mm-hmm.
but you're voting on abortion. Let's take that thing off the table. That is a ridiculous argument we have, anyways. Fix everything else. And we can also, in that time, say, oh, by the way, why are you having the abortion? Let's address that issue. The economy sucks. That's probably going to be most people's reason for having an abortion, right? I can't afford a baby. I'm going to go to Planned Parenthood and take this burden off of me. Okay, now you're thriving. Maybe you're actually going to go, you know what? My finances are good. I want to have a baby.
I'll tell you what, because I can just anticipating what if anyone who's even as remotely far on the pro-life side as I am, anticipating the reaction to that. I will say, even disagreeing both on policy and ethically with the point on on principle, I like the idea because one, you're right. If there is going to be a national compromise, it does need to be an amendment. At least if you want to
It
enshrine it
would
in
it would be the
stone,
biggest compromise,
but
because it
also
would take so
because
much to make it happen.
but also because uh you you shouldn't be able to, for instance, pass a national capital punishment ban. Now they've tried to do that through the courts. The Supreme Court tried to do it by saying any kind of capital punishment is cruel and unusual. It didn't last, and it's a state by state thing. So if you wanted a national ban or restriction, to your point, restriction within certain limitations, you would need an amendment because it is not a federal issue. It is a state issue. So the reason I like the idea is one, because you recognize legally that this would have to be amendment, but two, if 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 that is what it takes to get people interested in an amendment process, I'm in. Because I have been saying for years, we need an Article 5 convention. Go look up the Constitution of the United States. In Article 5, it lays out the amendment process, and it can either originate in Congress through a vote that then sends the amendment to the states to be ratified, or the state legislatures themselves can call a convention for the purpose of recommending amendments to the states. And this is the people on the right who oppose this annoy the crap out of me because no, the you're not, California and New York aren't going to run wild and rewrite the Constitution in a state convention, because those amendments still have to be ratified the same way. It's just a matter of where did the amendments originate. There's no way they originate in Congress. People left and right, Democrat and Republican and Independent, overwhelmingly, like something like 75 for 80% of people for years, polling has showed something like 75 or 80% of Americans would support term limits. And yet it never comes out of Congress. You
Mhm.
talk about a winning issue. Why? Because they've rigged the system for incumbents and they don't want to get thrown out, because then they know how easy it is to get reelected and they don't want to, get rid of their gravy train.
Well, two things. Let me start with the positive one. The My thing when it comes to is it a life or not is I'm always looking for what's going to save the most people, what's going to be best for universal humanity. And just because you make it illegal doesn't save the most people. Okay. People aren't always going to do the right thing either. This was Kennedy's big revelation on abortion. He supported no limits because he's like, what woman would do this? And when he saw the numbers, and he was
Mm-hmm.
like, apparently a lot of them, right? And this is late term. This isn't just early term. And my thing is, what's going to save the most people? And making it, uh, throwing it back to the states. Some states are making it really hard to do, and some states are making it really easy to do. People are just going to go to the states where it's easy to do it and get it done. But my thing is, what are the factors that are contributing to the rate itself? And personally, I think if we can address that, we're actually going to save more people than just blanket making it illegal, right? Uh, because there's reasons people do it. And, we talked about evolutionary uh, blocks. Those reasons have some legitimacy, even though we shouldn't have to in modern society. We should be past that. But apparently we're not. And I would rather address the reasons people are doing it than just say don't do it. Just like alcoholism, right? Are you going to eliminate alcoholism by making it illegal? Well, we saw that during Prohibition. No. What we need to do is figure out why people are drinking so much
Mm-hmm.
and get to the root of that. Now, the not so positive thing is, you just brought up the reason, or we've talked about on many occasions the reason why the every life is precious, soul begins at conception crowd would hate what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Here, this is an even more, that's an understandable hate for what I said. The far left would also disagree with me. And I'm not saying because they want to be able to kill babies. They would disagree with me because after that happened, they would lose every election for a long time because they would no longer have that issue. They want the issue. They can care less about your baby or you. They want the issue because the issue creates power.
Some of them really care about the issue, but the party cares about the issue because it is so important
No, the
to their
people voting care
turnout,
about
their
the
election.
issue. The
Yeah.
people who are using it don't.
The politicians and the grifters who get and this happens on the right too. There's a phenomenon in the right, and it's coming. It's really only coming out now after Roe v. Wade was struck down, and the pro-life voters realized, oh, these pro-life organizations that were lobbying for so many years about this don't actually have a plan and don't have an organization to take this fight to the states because they're big baby, because all they cared about really was the donations and the access to the Republican Party. And that's the same thing on the pro-choice side is they Planned Parenthood cares about making money and maintaining access to the politicians who let them do it. And the politicians care about the voter turnout operation of Planned Parenthood and people like them, and then the money they can make by being in office. And what neither of them want is what you're talking about is, it made me think of this classic Norman Rockwell Americana painting of, it's called There and Back Again. I think, shoot, was it? There and Back Again, Joey's Story, Free Speech by Norman Rockwell. And for anyone who just listening, it is the classic painting of the kind of weather, you would look at this guy, he's got a flannel and a jacket on, and he's probably works with his hands. And he's standing up in like a city council type meeting, guys in suits around and looking up as he says his piece. Well, that takes work. That takes putting yourself out there. And so big baby and big abortion are able to get away with it because none of us want to, stick that pamphlet in our pocket and go to the city council meeting and stand up and say our piece. And that is what you're talking about, and what an Article 5 convention would do is, okay, this is you want abortion without restriction on a national level. Well, you can't do that through the legislature, and you sure as hell can't do it through executive order. So you write your amendment and bring it here. I'll write my amendment on limiting spending and taxation, and my amendments on term limits, and we'll come together and we'll argue about it, and then we'll have a vote and we'll decide which amendments go out to the states, and let the individual state legislatures and the people of the states through those legislatures will let them decide which ones actually change the Constitution for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want to do that. But if you are a true believer, put your money where your mouth is and let's do it. All right.
Politician's gonna politician though. I
Yeah.
remember when I was when was it? When it was the Unity campaign in 2020. I was just looking at the histories and bios of all these politicians there was like a list of like 40 people that had been brought forward of who would you nominate, and one of them that I remembered was because it was so egregious, and this was the thing that just popped in my head on this whole situation was Marco Rubio. Say what you want about Marco Rubio. I think he's a war hawk, all of these other things. But one of the things that popped out was a pro-life candidate, abortion restriction candidate, da 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 da, and it brought up his history in Florida and everything. And he had signed a bill that was like a 20-week abortion, law. And I'm like, that's actually pretty liberal by some people's standards. That's actually right in the middle, because I think if you were to take center left and center right, you would probably get 16 to 24. So 20 is right in the middle of that. I'm like, that's not like pro-life. That's actually pro-abortion. 20 weeks is a long time. That's 5 months.
That is a compromise position for the overwhelming
Yeah.
majority of Americans.
But the just using the words gets votes. And if we can take that away, why not take away an argument that's tearing us apart? And I really think if we take away the argument, we'll get that 900,000 to 1 million a year down to 250,000. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation for something like that. So
it would certainly be progress if you care about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that would be good enough for you or not, it's to your point, it's a hell of a lot better than what we have now.
Well, and as the half full, half empty, it's all the way full because errors matter. The realist approach is we're never going to be able to eliminate. So how can I best reduce? It's like getting older. We're all going to get older, but how can I make it happen the best way possible? Right? That's the realist approach is what can I do to make this better? not what can I do to get rid of this thing. I mean, the get rid of this thing in that argument is just as ridiculous as the communist utopia argument. There's never going to be utopia
Mhm.
in any argument. So let's make this the best possible result we can get.
Well, that seems like a good place to end it. And we've been rambling for a bit here, and we've got other stuff to do. So hopefully we said something that, was worthwhile and informative to at least some of you.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I guess we're not going to have a social for
Couple weeks.
a couple weeks
Yeah.
because you're going
So
out of town, out
for
of
anyone
country.
who watches our next Wheel of Time episode, no, we do shower and we do have different shirts, but we're gonna record our Wheel of Time episode now, so we can record another one while I'm out of town, and that way we'll just miss 1 week instead of two uh, over these next couple of weeks. The first couple of weeks of October, I'll be traveling, so we will get to that, and then we will see what kind of mess the world is in. Assuming I come back because I'm traveling overseas and World War III might start and I might get stuck. So who knows? You know, my wife was originally planning this vacation and wasn't going to what didn't think I would want to come. And I'm like, all right, first of all, I'm not letting you out of the country for 2 weeks by yourself and missing out on that. And two, what happens if the North crosses the 38th parallel? What are you gonna do? Huh? You've never seen Red Dawn.
Heck, sorry, a bunch of buzzards just landed. What are they eating? Is that a snake? They must be hungry because I think it's still alive.
Oh, dude.
So, oh yeah, in real time. All right. Yeah. Yes, I thought it was the hawk at first because the hawk that hangs out in my front
Yeah.
yard normally comes down, but I was like, no, that's a buzzard. No, whatever it is. Oh, it was hit by a car. It was dying.
Nature is metal.
Nature is metal. Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
a dying animal is being finished off by some buzzards. We'll be back again in a few weeks for the social stuff. We'll be back again in a few minutes, but you'll see it a few days later for the Wheel of Time. And it's kind of a bad place to have a break because we've got chapter 37, which isomorphic swimmingly brought forward as a point where Heath would say, let's just gloss over this 200-page chapter.
I was tempted. Yeah. Yeah. All
All
right. We'll
right,
see y'all then.
later.